Welcome to Truth Through Ideas, where I continue to explore all kinds of topics in personal growth, awakening, spirituality, and all kinds of related topics. So I kind of got, you could say, almost a download a little while ago today here about a way to explain a negative process that can happen by which we feel incredibly stuck, we don't know what's happening, and it's essentially duality run amok. So let me explain. Oftentimes, we've heard a lot about duality. This is a world of duality. This is a duality consciousness. We're in separation from each other and from source. And so this is a world of duality, which essentially means good versus bad, masculine, feminine, black and white, up and down. It's the idea that we're constantly facing opportunities to see one side versus the other of something, and then ultimately, hopefully, to integrate them. So, we see something that's very unpleasant, that's difficult for us, that's traumatic, and then we experience something that's really uplifting and that's fun. And then it's this way of incorporating all of this together in one piece so that we're not in denial, but neither are we stuck kind of, down in the depths, wallowing in our own sadness. And that would be one example of a duality, but there's so many, because duality is really the way that everything seems to work here. So one problem that people can have oftentimes is that they get stuck in a situation where on the surface it feels like a duality, and yet they actually can't even get to the point of deciding, what is this duality even about? Where am I? What am I dealing with? And so this is going to be pretty low tech today, because it might be nice to do a PowerPoint or make some slides for this, but it's actually going to work out great because there's just a few things I wanted to show here. So the first one is good versus bad, and this is really straightforward. This is simply saying, okay, if we're in a duality, we might have a good versus bad. So we're in a given situation, something feels a little funky, a little weird, and then we identify there's a good aspect to my experience and there's a bad aspect to my experience. And then we can talk about, how are you assessing good versus bad? What does that mean? How can you integrate all of that into your experience? And that becomes sort of, an interesting journey, the good versus bad journey. But again, what I'm talking about here is something where, what if it's more confusing than that? What if it's more complex than that? And you find yourself not even being able to get to this stage where you're simply saying, what's the good, what's the bad? What if you can't even get here, right? And so that's when we bring in the next model. And this one is a bit different. So I want you to just sort of sit with this and see what comes up. This model would be everything's okay versus confusion, right? So this one's different, because in the first one, things seem okay. It's like, wake up and smell the roses, go outside, drink a cup of coffee, take a walk, look at the blue clouds, look at the sunshine. It's this feeling of, I don't want to say being in a utopia, but being in a situation where you have what you need. Things are basically in order. Things feel good. You have kind of the essentials in order to live a fulfilling day, a fulfilling period of time. Your consciousness is more or less in a place that's coherent. That's the everything's okay side. And then you have this confusion side, which is basically, it's kind of paralytic. It's like a freezing where you say, wait a sec, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I'm okay anymore. I feel weird. I feel funny. Something's off in this situation. And if anything is coming up for you, just kind of try to identify some of those situations, when this might have happened in your life, what it might mean, right? And so it's the sense that I don't know what's going on anymore. Okay, so this is different from than the good and bad, where we can actually identify a good and we can identify a bad. This is saying, well, we're sort of identifying a good, and we're identifying it in the sense of just feeling satisfied and feeling peaceful, like things are all right, things are okay. Versus all of a sudden, we don't know up from down. We don't know left from right. And so this process in itself, it's actually not a full duality. It's kind of a trick, okay? And when you get into this place, you might think, okay, I'm sort of in a dualistic situation because something seems okay and something seems not okay. But it doesn't actually stop there, because remember, on the right side of that equation, it was confusion. I'm literally so confused, I don't know what's happening anymore. I don't know the meaning of my own experiences. I don't know how to assess my own emotional feedback. I basically just feel lost. And really what happens here is that opens the door. And it opens the door into a spiraling, cascading process that's happening very much through our emotional body. Okay, and so I want to show you what that looks like. The top part of the diagram will look pretty much like what we saw, okay? Everything's okay, and then confusion. But what happens in this confusion? See, this is sort of where the trick is, because it looks like its own category on the other side here, where there's this confusion piece. However, being confused means you can't decide between two things. So you follow it one level down and you have yet again, everything's okay versus confusion. So the sort of duality or the false duality repeats again. Everything's okay, or am I just confused? But the confusion component itself, it contains the emotion, that emotional core of lost, feeling lost, of is everything okay or am I confused? And then that itself, we can go again. Is everything okay or am I confused? And then I think, I wrote it again. Is everything okay or am I confused? And then to infinity, right? So think about that process. It's a spiraling process. It spirals out of control where we really don't know. As long as we're in this place, it's like we see the abyss, because the confusion side contains in it all of these steps, right? Now, this is actually, you could say something in mathematics of, I haven't studied any of this kind of stuff in so long. I think it has to do with the binomial thing, and it looks like some kind of a series, geometric series. To be honest, I'm not sure, and we don't need to worry about that right now. In a future video, maybe for future work, I can follow up on that and think if there's a way to kind of look at this from a more mathematical perspective, because it always is cool, or it can be cool, to compare the more scientific ways of understanding with consciousness. And I think there's a lot of great ground to explore looking at consciousness as a bit of a puzzle that way. But we don't need to get into that now. It's not important here. So you can see this is the process of kind of spiraling out of control. And essentially now let's look at really what's happening with your emotional body in this process. So the everything's okay is essentially feeling empowered. It's feeling like I have a handle on life. I know what's going on. I'm okay. I have mastery over myself. I have some sense of identity. I have a sense of what I like and what I don't like. It's kind of like I'm okay with duality. I can handle duality because I comprehend it. I know people that I do well with. I know who I don't do well with. I know how to craft fruitful situations for myself and how to pursue things that are rewarding and more, okay? The other side of the equation is, again, it's not a straightforward thing like I'm not feeling well or things are bad, because then we could simply flip out of it at some point and kind of work through that emotion to kind of resolve that sense of duality. But the problem is you don't even know what's going on. Think about this. This is the abyss of confusion, where you can't even tell if you're doing well or poorly anymore. You can't tell within this seed of confusion, am I okay? Do I get to be empowered here, or am I lost? You see, this side of the equation opens up the whole abyss again, where you start tumbling into not knowing, right? You have no idea, am I empowered or am I lost, confused? So the confusion contains the entire sense of being lost, being disempowered, being disenfranchised, feeling conflicted. To bring in a little psychology, if you're familiar with the concept of the double bind, you could say this confusion is the double bind as well, because it's sort of like it's a lose-lose situation. Either I think things are kind of okay, but I don't really feel okay, or I embrace the fact, so to speak, that things are not okay, and then I'm in the abyss, right? And that will usually correlate with some phenomenon in your life that you can identify. But the point is here that the confusion side is the whole world of feeling lost in turmoil, where you don't know right from wrong, good from bad. You actually can't even identify what the duality in your life is. You're really that lost. And so the confusion means you don't have sovereignty over your own emotional body. You feel like it belongs to someone else. Now, the reason why fractal, the concept of the fractal comes in here, is because a fractal is really a microcosm that's a macrocosm. And so you see one little kind of shard or piece of stained glass or something, and you see within that the entire pattern replicated. It's like everything is contained in one small piece. And also it scales up in the other direction, where what you're looking at is a small component of an even bigger tapestry. So everything is containing its own element repeated, basically. And so in this, this whole cycle would be confusion, right? I didn't write that up here, but this we could see as one more instance of confusion. And then the whole process kind of repeats upwards. By which I mean to say simply that every time you're in the middle of this confusion episode where you don't know what's going on, you are thrown back into the whole dynamic all over again. It's like the whole thing repeats, right? It's an infinitely repeating problem. And so now that I've described this a little bit, what would you do in this kind of a situation when you're feeling this way? Meaning you're simply unable to define what's working or not working, and what's working or not working in life. You can't even define actually how you're feeling. You think you have some idea of what things being okay might feel like, and yet as soon as you get in that situation, it's like a ticking time bomb until you feel the confusion, because the everything's okay is simply one wing of that polarity, and the other side is the abyss of being confused and then not even knowing what's going on anymore, right? What would you do in that situation? Essentially, the whole thing is a trap, okay? The whole false dialectic, false duality is a trap, because as soon as you get this feeling of everything being okay, before you're even seeing any of this abyss or feeling any of this abyss, and you're simply at the stage where it's just two, everything okay versus confusion. As soon as you're even here, you've already basically lost, because you're existing in a false duality where you can never get a handle on who you are. And so what this is ultimately showing us is when you feel this way, it's really a sign that you're in abuse, that you have suffered abuse, that you were fragmented away from yourself. You were already told on some level that you don't get to know what you like and what you don't like. You don't get sovereignty. You don't get to be you. That has already happened somewhere inside you. And so your entire process now of figuring out what works for you and what doesn't, and going into the world to try to attain a sense of peace, happiness, joy, and order, that whole effort is essentially doomed until you can see that you're existing in a dynamic of running away from yourself and on some level trying to recapture yourself. The reason why that's happening is because anytime you think you're feeling good, it's a part of you feeling good that's been broken off from other aspects of you. So when you think you're feeling good, what it really means is you're clinging to the design that you can kind of see. It's like you're doing the best that you can with the information you have about yourself. And so everything being okay is kind of like my ability to attain a little bit of a feeling of peace and harmony, given the fact that I've lost so much already, that so much of me has already fragmented away. And when that process in the cycle ends and you're thrown back on the other side of feeling confused, you're staring down into the well with no bottom. Because that well says, I'm seeing right now in the microcosm of this problem, every problem I've ever had, every moment of feeling lost I've ever had. Because that well contains within it this whole infinitely oscillating back and forth. I'm okay, I'm not okay. I'm okay, I'm not okay. Really, most of the time, this will go to a certain kind of childhood trauma, because this is a sense of not knowing when something was done to help you or to hurt you, not knowing when something was good or bad, not knowing when you were feeling pleased or traumatized or wounded or whatever, because your simple ability to differentiate was robbed away from you because of a double bind situation, as I mentioned, that has come back in, right? So you weren't able to decide things for yourself. You weren't able to differentiate things for yourself. This has produced a core wounding whereby there's always this well somewhere. It's a little bit like you live in a house on a property, and if you're having a nice time hanging out with your spouse, with your kids, or watching a movie or baking cookies, what have you, All you have to do is look out the window at a certain part of your property and you see that well. I mean, you're going to look in that direction sooner or later, or you're going to take a walk outside and you're going to walk by the well. And as soon as you look inside of it, there it is again. It's that bottomless sense of not knowing who you are. And when this persists for a really long time, your entire worldview will be wrapped up in the sense of either I have a hard-won peace, I fought really hard to win this temporary sense of peace that I know myself and I can be happy with what I've got, versus feeling like I have no clue what's going on, I have no clue of who I am, and I don't even know if I'm happy or not, satisfied or not, if things are okay or not. I mean, I know I'm dissatisfied, but I don't know what I'm justified in feeling. I don't know what I'm justified in doing. I don't know who I should be around, etc. Okay? So this is a real issue. I think looking at it this way is really cool. I think this visual might be helpful. If this is helpful to you, I would love to hear about it. If you have any thoughts, please share. I think it's cool to see that at every moment in this dynamic, in this kind of negative fractal of chaos, you have a temporary feeling of things being okay that's basically an illusion. And then you have this other illusion, because after all, these are both illusions. The illusion over here is that you can only feel okay if everything feels okay and if you're shutting out any conflicting information. So it's a sense of needing to be a little bit OCD and obsessive about determining what's true or not. So, that's why it can never last, because you're always in denial about something, unfortunately. It's really hard to see this, but you're always keeping some information about yourself away. Versus this illusion, the illusion of, because this isn't even you. So when you're feeling the illusion of being confused, not to make this even more complicated, but the reason why this is all an illusion is because it's based on the idea that you can never gain a true understanding of yourself. And what does that really mean? Ultimately, that's the fear that you don't exist as an independent being. And this is the hard pill to swallow that has to do with people who have survived all kinds of abuse, many, many, many kinds of abuse, from very 3D, very physical, very abuse that you could point to, versus abuse that's totally energetic, that perhaps no one ever identified for you. And so it's really up to you to figure this out. So it's about illusions. This is a negative fractal that's composed of two illusions: an illusion of a piece that only exists through shutting out reality in some sense, and then doing the very best you can to construct a false one, versus an illusion that all is lost, all is terrible, all you have is a bottomless pit, because in that perspective, you only have these fragmented parts of yourself that will never really know how you feel, and you won't even be able to tell what's going on. So this is the sharing that I have for today, and I hope that this was interesting to you. Thank you.